now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the radical Majid Nawaz. And the topic, as you should see on your screens right about now, Trump may freeze out Israel to recognize a Palestinian state. This news, of course, developed over the course of last week, but today President Trump has landed in Saudi Arabia, and the news was ahead of his trip to Saudi Arabia. Rumors reported in multiple press outlets that President Trump has lost his patience with the more warmongering of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and may is rumored to, unconfirmed yet, but reported by multiple news outlets around the world, may recognize a Palestinian state and freeze out Israel unless Netanyahu agrees to a peace deal and settlement. Now, of course, this would be consistent with the analysis that we've had here at Radical Media, that a grand regional settlement for peace is looming, and that settlement for peace includes Ukraine, Yemen, Iran, and of course a Palestinian state in return for regional normalization with the Arab states, and if Israel wants a part of it, recognition for the state of Israel. But let's start here. The Times today reports Trump lands in Saudi Arabia to begin Middle East tour. And to read an extract from the newspaper, The Times, Trump will attend an investment conference and a Gulf Arab summit, and is also expected to meet a group of regional leaders, including Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian National Authority, and President Aoun of Lebanon. It is expected that they will also seek to sway Trump into pressuring Israel to end the war in Gaza and not go through with a plan to occupy and retain control over parts of the territory. So this is the news today. But as we said, the news prior to the visit that Trump is currently engaged in with Saudi Arabia looked like this, and you can see it on your screens now, reported by the Jerusalem Post, no less. And we're just going to read the headline for you. It says, Gulf diplomatic sources debate if Trump will announce U.S. recognition of Palestinian state. That's dated the 10th of May, 2025, with the subheading, Saudi Arabia will host a Gulf U.S. summit in mid-May during Trump's Mideast visit. Speculation swirls over a major announcement on a Palestinian state and peaceful U.S.-Saudi nuclear cooperation. To read an extract from that Jerusalem Post article, 10th of May, reported by the Jerusalem Post, Saudi Arabia will host a Gulf U.S. summit in mid-May during Trump's Mideast visit. Speculation swirls over a major announcement on a Palestinian state and peaceful U.S.-Saudi nuclear cooperation. The summit, hosted by Saudi Arabia in its capital, Riyadh, was preceded by numerous predictions regarding the announcement that Trump referred to, describing it as a very important announcement during a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney at the White House on Tuesday, May the 6th. In addition to what Trump intends to announce, the summit's agenda and the deals and agreements expected to take place have become the talk of the town, ranging from security and military deals to technology deals and artificial intelligence deals. A Gulf diplomatic source who declined to be named or disclose his position told the media line, President Donald Trump will issue a declaration regarding the state of Palestine and American recognition of it, and that there will be the establishment of a Palestinian state without the presence of Hamas. The source also added, if an announcement of American recognition of the state of Palestine is made, it will be the most important declaration that will change the balance of power in the Middle East, and more countries will join the Abraham Accords. So if it is true that Trump will announce unilaterally announce the establishment of a Palestinian state, then of course it would be a historic announcement, but it is as of yet unconfirmed. These are unconfirmed reports in media, reported by multiple media outlets amidst rumors of a rift with Netanyahu, which we are coming to momentarily. But what confirms the suspicions that Trump is intent on sealing his legacy by securing a grand regional settlement in the Middle East, despite what Netanyahu may want, is a second development that occurred during this same time period, and that is confirmation of back-channel direct negotiations between the United States of America and Hamas directly. You can see here, as reported by the Times of Israel itself, dated 17th of May, 2025, headlined "Back Channel Helps Secure Release of American Israeli Hostage, Sources Tell Times of Israel." And to read an extract from that Times of Israel article, which is on your screens now, dated 12th of May, to correct myself there, a third-party mediator operated a back channel between the United States and Hamas that helped secure the agreement to release American Israeli hostage Aidan Alexander, a source familiar with the matter, and a Palestinian official revealed to the Times of Israel on Sunday. That's two sources, which is what one requires to verify news in breaking news such as that. Now, the interesting thing is if Qatar, it's confirmed that Qatar did indeed engage in back-channel communications, facilitated, we should say, back-channel communications between Hamas and the United States of America directly. It wouldn't be the first time that Qatar has done something like this. Previously, they were involved in organizing back-channel communications between the United States of America and the Taliban directly, which led to the unilateral withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan and the returning to power of the Taliban. To continue reading from that article, the back channel was operated by a non-governmental individual who passed along messages between Hamas leadership in Qatar and US Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, the sources said. The back channel was opened last month with the person urging Hamas to release Alexander unconditionally, telling the terror group that the move would go a long way with the Trump administration and potentially open the door to Washington coaxing Israel to agree to a deal that would bring about an end to the war in Gaza in exchange for the release of the remaining hostages. A trade Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has until now rejected, arguing that it would leave Hamas in power. Over the weekend, Hamas informed the go-between that it had agreed to release Alexander unconditionally, but wanted Witkoff to know that the step should not be viewed as a one-off, the sources said. Hamas stressed to the mediator that it was ready to work with the Trump administration to secure a permanent ceasefire in Gaza with security arrangements in order to ensure a years-long calm until a final settlement of the conflict is reached. That final settlement would be the rumored recognition for a Palestinian state. But crucially, and this is something that the Gulf Arab states, led by Saudi Arabia, but including the UAE and others, would stipulate themselves, that Palestinian state must be governed by other than Hamas, who currently, until Israel's war against Gaza, Hamas were ruling in Gaza. And the Times of Israel continues, in an earlier statement attributed to an Israeli official, Netanyahu's office said that it was still prepared to accept the so-called Witkoff proposal, through which Hamas agrees to release half of the hostages up front in exchange for a weeks-long truce during which the sides agree to hold talks on the terms of a permanent end to the war. Now, going to the second bit in bold there, Hamas has insisted on ironclad guarantees, such as a UN Security Council resolution, in order to ensure that Israel holds those talks and agrees to end the war. In addition to releasing the hostages, Israel is demanding that Hamas dismantle its governing and military capabilities. While the group has said it is prepared to forego control of the Gaza Strip to an independent committee of Palestinian technocrats, it has held off on the demand to permanently disarm. Now, that last line there is the crucial factor, because if indeed the US will go ahead and recognize a Palestinian state without Hamas control, perhaps ruled by the Palestinian Authority from the West Bank, and technocrats appointed in Gaza who are responsible to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, led by Mahmoud Abbas, that kind of deal could be why Mahmoud Abbas is rumored to be discussing a Palestinian state with Trump in his current visit to the Gulf region, and he's landed indeed in Saudi Arabia today. Do not forget that the Good Friday arrangement in Northern Ireland saw a similar deal made with the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, that they stepped back from governing. Of course, they then handed over governance to Sinn Féin, but the IRA only agreed to disarm over a series of subsequent negotiations. And of course, that led to the great peace deal, the Good Friday Agreement, and the end of the conflict in Northern Ireland, which nobody, if you check public opinion in Ireland or Northern Ireland or the United Kingdom, wants to see a return to. So there is a model that could be used for the removal of Hamas from power in Gaza, the agreement to allowing a Sinn Féin equivalent, a different civilian authority, such as the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas, to come into power, to retain control of the Gaza Strip. And in return, Hamas agrees to a permanent ceasefire, and Netanyahu likewise agrees. The deal would be facilitated by Qatar, just as the Taliban deal was facilitated by Qatar. And the Times reports today that there is anger. Well, the headline says MAGA anger as Trump accepts jet from Qatari, quote, jihadists in suits. Subheading, allies of the president say it is wrong to accept the Boeing 747-8 for use as Air Force One from a country, quote, that has links to the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. So though Qatar would facilitate the deal, there are voices attempting to scupper this track to diplomacy or back channel that is going on, facilitated by Qatar, involving Hamas negotiating directly with the United States of America. But do not be deceived. This heading states MAGA anger. It isn't MAGA anger whatsoever. MAGA is overwhelmingly anti-war and would accept whatever peace terms MAGA's leader, President Trump, agreed to, because President Trump does not act alone, but acts in accordance to a faction of power within the United States of America, primarily backed by military intelligence, that are involved in all of these negotiations, as distinct from the alphabet intelligence agencies or the civilian intelligence, such as the CIA and the FBI, who have historically been opposed to Trump coming to power and have attempted to prevent him, even by way of assassination, from coming to power. So when it says here in the headline, MAGA oppose the Trump accepting a gift from the Qatari state, do not be deceived. That isn't MAGA. It is, however, the following. The article in its detail explains Laura Loomer, a right-wing podcaster and, as the Times says, conspiracy theorist, drew attention to the Qatari government's links with the Muslim Brotherhood and its connections with groups such as Hamas, though has acted as mediator between the US, Israel, and Hamas during the war in Gaza. Laura Loomer is quoted by the Times as saying, "I love President Trump," Loomer said in a social media post. "I would take a bullet for him, but I have to call a spade a spade. We cannot accept a $400 million gift from jihadists in suits." That's referring to the Qatari government. She also questioned Trump's objectives in the Middle East. Oh, interesting. So it's not just about the gift that Qatar gave to the Department of Defense in the name of Air Force One, a brand new palace in the skies, as Trump's referred to it as, a Boeing jet that Trump will use as Air Force One, because there's a huge delay in updating the American Air Force One fleet. And Trump is unlikely to have a new fleet by at least until 2027, which is when his term is coming to an end. So Qatar stepped in and offered the United States government, said to then be going to the presidential Trump library afterwards, a brand new Air Force One jet that Trump, no doubt, is delighted to accept. But Laura Loomer isn't just upset with that. And Trump's point is, what, you want me to pay for it instead? I mean, what's your problem with us accepting this jet? Laura Loomer's concerns go further, and she criticizes Trump's approach to negotiating peace or a grand regional settlement for peace in the Middle East. If you look to the bold writing, she also questioned Trump's objectives in the Middle East. I mean, you've got an issue with a grand regional settlement for peace. The headline says MAGA criticized Trump. Do not be deceived. MAGA is anti-war and would accept peace as they did with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. If it took for peace in Afghanistan to mean that the Taliban came to power, at least there is no more war and people being murdered and killed on a daily basis. That's what peace means. It means dealing with people you were previously fighting and accepting that non-war is better than war. But Laura Loomer doesn't seem to understand that. To continue, she also questioned Trump's objectives in the Middle East. It's going to be hard for the admin to designate the Muslim Brotherhood and obliterate Iranian proxies in Hamas and Hezbollah when Qatar funds the Muslim Brotherhood, harbors Hamas, and the US just accepted a $400 million jet from Qatar, Loomer wrote, adding, the biggest lobby in DC is the Qatar lobby. We are watching an Islamic takeover of our country in real time. Well, that's laughable because the biggest lobby in DC is actually confirmed factually to be AIPAC, the American Israeli Political or Public Action Committee, Laura. But anyway, to continue, again from the Times, you see that the peace extends to Syria. Now, before we go there, of course, the usual suspects would also object to Trump agreeing to peace and normalization with a new regime in Syria. But regulars of radical media will know that we have long said that this is a regional puzzle that will all come together. And we said it as the new regime took power in Syria, that the Russians withdrew from Syria in a reciprocal deal, knowing that if they left the sphere of influence of control that the Russians and the Iranians had over Syria via Assad, if they left that to the, yes, NATO allied regime that came to power in Syria, led by former Al-Qaeda commander Ahmad al-Shara, previously known as al-Jolani, that the Russian Navy withdrew from Syria without a fight. The Iranian military withdrew, the Revolutionary Guard that is, withdrew from Syria without a fight, allowing Ahmad Shara to come to power. Why did they do that? Well, we said at the time it was for a reciprocal deal that they would strike for peace in Ukraine. If you remember that, it was with the radical media article that we, here it is. You can see that dated 11th of December, Syrian revolution, Trump and Putin cut a deal to de-escalate World War III. Those of you who are regulars will remember the analysis that we mentioned in that last year, 11th of December, 2024. It's still up on our website for all of you to go and check it out. Well, we said then that this was a regional settlement, that there would be reciprocal peace deals. They, in fact, began with Afghanistan, again mediated by Qatar, for US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And it didn't matter who came to power if it meant ending the war. Of course, the Taliban came to power. It doesn't matter. That's peace. It's better than war. Likewise, as it was in Northern Ireland, by the way, Sinn Féin wasn't liked by pretty much anyone in the United Kingdom. There was a period where Gerry Adams was even banned from speaking on television. They had to have voiceovers with Gerry Adams' face. Imagine you're watching me speak now, but it's not my voice because the UK government legislated that we weren't allowed to watch the leader of Sinn Féin on our television screens. So they would have to dub his voice just so we could hear what the guy's actually saying to get around the law. Ultimately, Sinn Féin came to a power sharing agreement in Northern Ireland. Peace means talking to your enemies. And that's what the US did via Qatar in Afghanistan. It's what we said was part of a grand regional settlement. The same we said was being done in Syria in return for peace in Ukraine. And the rest of this stream is going to be to demonstrate that that's indeed what's going on. Trump is negotiating simultaneous peace deals. It's amazing, folks, if you understand what's happening. Simultaneous Middle East peace deals are being negotiated by one president and the faction that he is beholden to at the same time. And they will all come together in a moment where suddenly everybody will be caught unawares by peace breaking out in the Middle East. So we've just mentioned the press rumors of a recognition of a Palestinian state. That will be the last stage of this grand regional settlement. We said it began with Afghanistan, but now we're going to move to Syria, despite Laura Loomer's objections of, quote, Trump's approach to the Middle East. We're going to move to Syria to demonstrate the same happening there. So look at the Times today. It states this exactly as is on your screens now. There's the headline. May the 12th from the Times, Monday. Syrian leader offers Trump Ukraine-style minerals deal and tower in Damascus. Surprise, surprise. just after Trump struck the mineral deal with Zelensky. And of course, Zelensky now will end up agreeing to peace with Putin, whether he likes it or not. More on that in just a second. Ahmed Shara in Syria has offered a similar deal. According to the Times yesterday, Syrian leader offers Trump Ukraine-style minerals deal and tower in Damascus. Subheading, US president suggests he may ease sanctions to give country a fresh start. Oh, surprise, surprise. Peace is also coming in Syria. Here is an extract from that article. President Trump is planning to ease US sanctions on Syria after overtures from President Shara, who was the leader of Syria, who has offered concessions, including access for American companies to exploit natural resources in a Ukrainian-style minerals deal. Shara has even raised the possibility of a Trump Tower in Damascus, the Syrian capital, as part of his pitch to the US president through intermediaries thought to include senior figures in Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Last week, Shara met President Macron of France, who obtained a waiver on a UN travel ban for talks in Paris and suggested a gradual lifting of EU sanctions, provided the new regime stuck to pledges of inclusivity and reform. Shara may offer to begin talks on joining the Abraham Accords. There it is. You've heard us mention that many times. The Grand Regional Settlement for Peace is going to be a revival of the Abraham Accords that Trump struck in his first term before globalists kicked him out and attempted to abort the Abraham Accords Grand Regional Settlement for Peace. This is why they don't want Trump in power, because he is working to end the wars in the Middle East. He is the only consistently verifiable and proven anti-war candidate to have come to power in the US. And that's why you see that they all try to stop him coming back to power. And yet, despite that, he came back into office and is seeking to revive the Abraham Accords Part 2. To continue reading from the Times, it states there, to go back to the last section in bold in the middle of the page, Shara may offer to begin talks on joining the Abraham Accords, a set of deals to normalize relations between Arab nations and Israel already signed by the UAE and Bahrain. The Times has been told by security sources. Another US security source with close ties to the Middle East confirmed that the possibility of Syria entering the Abraham Accords had been pitched to Shara's government, with the UAE acting as intermediary. It's all coming together, folks. To continue reading from that Times, before we do that, now we're going to tell you who's opposed to Trump's Grand Regional Settlement for Peace. Now, those of you who've been following this closely won't be very surprised by the names we're about to reveal, as reported by the Times today, of course, in addition to Laura Loomer. But those who have been following it from a distance may be surprised to learn of some of these names. But don't worry, all is in hand. President Trump is fully aware of how to gain peace in the Middle East, the Grand Regional Settlement for Peace, and a revived Abraham Accords 2.0. These names you're about to read, who are opposing this direction of travel, ultimately work for Trump, and as we will reveal in this stream later on, will be sacked if they go too far in pushing for war and continuing their anti-peace rhetoric. So the Times today reports, you can see it there, Tulsi Gabbard, oh dear, Trump's director of national intelligence, is among those understood to remain wary, if not hostile, about the encounter. That is the potential meeting between President Trump and the leader of Syria to discuss peace. So understood to remain wary, if not hostile, about the encounter, and may try to prevent it. Gabbard made a unilateral visit to Syria in 2016 while a member of Congress to meet President Assad, and came back urging greater dialogue to bring his regime in from the cold. Interesting. Why would Tulsi Gabbard be opposing President Trump negotiating peace with the leader of Syria? Tulsi's meant to be an anti-war candidate. The writing is on the wall. The only way to end the war in Syria, the civil war, is to talk to the new regime, because the alternative to talking to the new regime is a return to the civil war that the new regime led by Ahmed Shara put a complete and total end to. Now, that ending was facilitated by Turkey under Erdogan in what is known as Operation Peace Spring, that was begun in Trump's first term, starting in 2016. Operation Peace Spring, between Turkey and Trump started in Trump's first term to bring an end to the war in Syria. It ultimately came to a conclusion with Turkish facilitation of the arrival to power of Ahmed al-Shara. So Tulsi Gabbard, who is director of national intelligence, not foreign policy, should understand exactly what's going on in foreign policy by speaking to people who are dealing with foreign policy. And when we need to understand national intelligence, we'll speak to Tulsi Gabbard. But the foreign policy wheel of this started under Trump's first term and is destined for a conclusion. Of course, remember this point, that Operation Peace Spring, initiated by President Trump in his first term with Turkey under Erdogan. We're going to remember the fact this involves Turkey, because we're going to come to Turkey in a minute to tie all of these loose ends together. But to understand who else opposes this, let's go back to the Times today. Another skeptic is said to be Sebastian Gorka, Trump's counterterrorism advisor. Mr. Gorka, if we need to understand something about domestic US intelligence, we'll ask you. But foreign policy, when it comes specifically to the Middle East, this is something that precedes your presence in the US government. So get back in line, Sebastian. Now, we're going to continue reading from the Times. Another pro-Israel aide, Mike Waltz, the former national security advisor, now nominated as ambassador to the UN, is understood to have kept Trump from learning about the concessions Syria is willing to make before he was ousted last month. Waltz was reassigned after the administration learned he had met privately in Washington with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, in February, and was urging Trump to go along with Israel's plans to bomb Iran. So what Sebastian Gorka and Tulsi Gabbard have in common is that they agree with Mike Waltz, all of whom oppose Trump's attempts for normalization in the Middle East and these peace deals that he's seeking to strike. How did it end for Mike Waltz? Well, Mike Waltz was, as the Times reported, the Times of London, you just heard it there yourselves, Mike Waltz decided to engage in unauthorized conversations with Netanyahu to oppose Trump's Middle East peace efforts. Tulsi Gabbard, Sebastian Gorka should pay attention to how that ended for Mike Waltz, who was unceremoniously kicked out of his position. As the Times reports there today, you can see it at the end of the page. Waltz was reassigned after the administration learned he had met privately in Washington with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, in February, and was urging Trump to go along with Israeli plans to bomb Iran. He used to be a national security advisor, no longer. So Ms. Gabbard and Mr. Gorka should be paying attention to the trajectory of Mike Waltz. And if they continue to oppose peace in the Middle East, they may well end up exactly where Mike Waltz ended up. To continue reading, there are voices who are for Trump's initiatives for peace in the Middle East, specifically here in this regard with the new president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara. And those voices who are for are, surprise, surprise, none other than Steve Witkoff, the same man that Trump has sent to negotiate peace with the Palestinians, is for peace with Syria. So that's the one you should pay attention to, not Mike Waltz, not Tulsi Gabbard, and certainly not Sebastian Gorka. So here we have it from the Times today. Again, you can see there, 13th of May, Times of London reports. Others, including Steve Witkoff, the president's Middle East envoy, are thought to be more favorable of a thawing of relations with Syria, knowing how readily Trump will dispense with protocol and tradition to strike deals, and that the US president prefers making money to making war. Well, listen. The US president prefers making money to making war. We'll take that. That's acceptable. May not be our intentions, your intentions, but if Trump prefers making money to making war, we can live with that. To continue reading from the Times, Witkoff is among the most trusted members of the inner circle. The Trump administration is concerned that Syria could turn to China for infrastructure projects. Shara is looking east to China, but obviously we would like him to look west, the source said. Some in the Trump administration, backed by Gulf states, are eager to press home the opportunity to peel Syria away from the influence of Iran, a former backer of Assad's regime. And this is the key point here. Ahmed al-Shara came into power in Syria, replacing a pro-Iranian and pro-Russian regime. Why is Tulsi Gabbard opposed to normalization with a regime in Syria that is going to be in the NATO sphere of influence and not in the Iranian, Russian, Chinese, BRICS sphere of influence. Go figure. And of course, this is something we just to reconfirm for you, have been forecasting at Radical Media for a long time. As we've been long been forecasting here at Radical Media, a grand regional settlement for peace is coming. Radical Media reports 19th February 2025, Trump and Putin cancel World War III, label Zelensky a dictator, and send peace envoys to Saudi Arabia to end Ukraine war. We'll put all these receipts in the written version of tomorrow's Radical Dispatch for you as usual, but you can see there that everything is slowly coming together. Now, this is in the Times today, headlined, Trump demands that Ukraine agrees to peace talks with Russia. We did say to you that it was a grand regional settlement. It began with Afghanistan, it will end with Palestine, and in the middle, you'll have peace in Ukraine negotiated, peace in Syria negotiated, and that's what we're seeing. And so, of course, the receipts demonstrate that this is ongoing, despite what the naysayers such as Laura Loomer, Tulsi Gabbard, Mike Waltz, and what was his name? Sebastian Gorka, so-called counterterrorism expert, despite what they think, this is going to happen regardless. You can see it in the Times today, 13th of May. Trump demands that Ukraine agrees to peace talks with Russia. And we can see in the wording there from the article, President Trump has demanded that Ukraine should immediately agree to direct talks with Russia in a bid to end the war. In a post on social media, Trump said President Putin of Russia doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath. Ukraine should agree to this immediately. That's a post by President Trump on his social media. We're going to read it again. President Trump said, President Putin of Russia doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath. Ukraine should agree to this immediately. So Trump's telling Zelensky to go to Turkey to discuss peace with the Russians. We did say you would come back to Turkey. Remember, Turkey is a key player in facilitating this. Operation Peace Spring, begun by Erdogan under Trump's first term, began the process of ending the civil war in Syria. That has now culminated in Ahmed Sharaa coming to power in Syria. Turkey is now pushing for the Americans to recognize that new Syrian regime. We said in return, remember we said that in return, we will recognize what Putin wants with Ukraine in Russia. That was the deal we said was struck, right? If you remember back when the Russians and the Iranians withdrew from Syria and Assad's regime fell, we said that was the deal that was struck, that Syria would end up in the NATO sphere of influence in return for a peace deal in Ukraine, according to what Putin wants. There's the headline. We said it for you in December 2024. Trump and Putin cut a deal to de-escalate World War III. And so it is no surprise to us that in today's times, that's exactly what Trump has told Putin to do, and that is to go to Turkey. Remember, we said Operation Peace Spring, and Turkey is where this began way back in Trump's first term. And Trump is saying to Zelensky, go to Turkey, and demands that Ukraine agrees to peace talks with Russia. There's the headline again for you. That's today's Times. And so, of course, that is the trajectory. That is the direction of travel. There will be a grand regional settlement. It began with Afghanistan. It will end with recognition of a Palestinian state. In the middle, there will be a peace deal struck with Syria in return for a peace deal struck with Russia over Ukraine. NATO, the NATO sphere of influence, Turkey being a member of NATO, will gain influence over the new Syrian regime. In return, NATO will pull back from those areas in Ukraine that Putin objects to, and Putin will get his way there, of course, in the ethnic Russian areas, not least the Crimea. So that's the deal that we spelled out for you last December. That's what's going on. And of course, the new Pope, Leo, is it 16th? Forgive us, has also argued for a similar peace deal to be struck. As Teresa Parsi posts, the Pope may be new, but the moral and strategic clarity remains solid and unchanged. In his first Sunday Mass, Pope Leo XIV, forgive us, that's the correct number. Pope Leo the 14th calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and immediate resumption of aid. And here's a video of the new Pope Leo the 14th saying just that.
Profondamente quanto accade nella striscia di Gaza. Cessi immediatamente il fuoco. Si presti soccorso umanitario alla stremata popolazione civile e siano liberati tutti.
Now, of course, sorry, that didn't show up clearly on the screens. We'll publish all these receipts tomorrow. That will have subtitles. You'll be able to read what you just heard. The Pope there calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. What's in it for the Arabs if Trump recognizes a Palestinian state and recognizes the new Syrian regime in return for a deal with Putin in Ukraine? Well, the Times explains that today as well. Trump is touting massive Gulf deals, but what's in it for the Arabs? And to read an extract from that article, the Times reports 12th of May, apparent cracks between Trump's administration and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, may have provided some room to maneuver. Netanyahu, who was planning a military strike on Iran, was blindsided by Trump's announcements of talks with Iran in March, and again this month when Trump announced a ceasefire with the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. So what's in it for the Arabs is an end to all the civil wars that have been raging across the Middle East. The peace will bring a lasting period of permanent peace and economic prosperity. And as we said in Radical Media, forecasted there for you on the 16th of April, Trump kickstarts Iran-US talks. Grand regional settlement for peace is coming. Again, this involves Gaza, and Israel under Netanyahu is not very happy with all these developments. And so as the Times reports in this headline dated the 5th of May, Israeli Security Cabinet approves plans to occupy all of Gaza. So Netanyahu is rushing to physically occupy Gaza so that he has something in hand to negotiate with the Americans when a Palestinian state is demanded. And to read from that, Israel Security Cabinet, this is the Times, 5th of May, Israel Security Cabinet has approved plans to occupy all of Gaza and stay there for an indeterminate period, breaking a long-standing taboo. The move to occupy Gaza is likely to draw strong international condemnation and was heavily criticized by family of some of the remaining hostages. But to continue there to the middle of the page, you see in bold, it would be put into operation after President Trump's visit to the Middle East next week, which is now seen as a last chance to reach a ceasefire deal. So this is what Netanyahu plans to do, to joining, of course, those naysayers in the US, such as Laura Loomer, Tulsi Gabbard, Mike Waltz, and others, Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, the pro-war hawk, who have all opposed Trump's plans for a grand regional settlement for peace in the Middle East. Of course, Netanyahu would be on that side, but Trump remains adamant. Here is Trump saying that he's got to work for a resolution in Gaza. POTUS, on his conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, Gaza came up and I said, you got to be good to Gaza. Those people are suffering. There's a very big need for food and medicine, and we're taking care of it. We're pushing people very hard. And here is video of Trump saying precisely that for you.
Medicine coming into Gaza. When you spoke to Mr. Netanyahu the other day, did that come up at all about access to humanitarian aid?
No, Gaza came up, and I said, we got to be good to Gaza. Those people are suffering. We got to be good to Gaza. We're going to take care of that. There's a very big need for medicine, food and medicine, and we're taking care of it.
In terms of like opening up more access points,
Pushing people very hard.
pushing the Israelis
We are
to open up more access
very hard
points.
to get food and medicine into Gaza.
How did the Prime Minister respond to that?
Well,
Now, you've heard it there yourselves. Trump is pushing for relief to Gaza. The Middle East Eye reports, headlined, Trump doesn't want Netanyahu to spoil his Gulf visit as it's causing tension. Subheaded, Trump has taken several decisions in the lead up to his Gulf visit that have ignored Israeli interests. Very interesting. We're going to read some extracts from that article for you. For months, This is from Middle East Eye reporting 9th of May. For months, Trump has scorned Netanyahu on the talks as his closest media allies attack Mossad agents trying to hamstring the US leader. By his own admission, Trump even resisted Israeli pressure to launch a preemptive attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran. At the same time, Trump gave Netanyahu his full backing to wage war on Gaza and choke it of supplies. He also won plaudits in Israel for unleashing a bombing campaign on the Houthis in Yemen. Now, Trump is moving to silence the guns in Yemen and come to an accommodation with Israel on Gaza that is upsetting Netanyahu's base. At this stage, it's clear Trump will take some big decisions unilaterally without significant consideration of Israeli interests when he wants to, like on Iran or Yemen. Michael Wahid Hanna, director of the US program at International Crisis Group, told the Middle East Eye. On Friday, Israeli media reported that US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had cancelled an upcoming visit to Israel. The visit was scheduled to begin a day before Trump's visit to the Gulf on the 13th of May. Hegseth was set to meet Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz. So there we have it. Clearly, a rift is emerging between what are Israel's interests and the unilateral peace deals that Trump is pursuing in the Middle East, regardless of what Netanyahu wants. To continue reading from the Middle East Eye there, on Tuesday, Trump made a surprise announcement to enter a ceasefire with the Houthis. The decision is likely to remove an irritant in the nuclear talks with Iran because the Houthis receive weapons and training from Tehran. The US and Iran are scheduled to meet in Oman for their fourth round of talks on Sunday, just before Trump arrives in the Gulf. Trump's announcement also delighted US Arab allies and Saudi Arabia. The former had been lobbying Trump for an end to the attacks before his arrival in the kingdom, Middle East Eye reported. It has also appeased Trump's war-weary America First base. But the decision shook Israel because Trump conditioned the truce on the Houthis not attacking global shipping, leaving Israel out in the cold. The ceasefire came just days after Houthi missiles struck near the main terminal of Israel's Ben Gurion airport, leaving Israel out in the cold to sign a ceasefire with the Houthis. Washington's The Hill reports there. Houthi ceasefire hands Trump a win ahead of Middle East trip. To read from The Hill, dated 8th of May, but we honored their commitment and their word. They gave us their word that they wouldn't be shooting ships anymore, and we honor that, Trump said during a swearing-in ceremony in the Oval Office on Wednesday for his new ambassador to China, former Senator David Perdue. Associate Fellow with the Middle East Institute Al-Dawsari said that the ceasefire agreement came to fruition through different interventions and with different interests at play. She pointed to a visit from Saudi Defense Minister Khalid bin Salman Al Saud to Tehran in mid-April, where the message was for Iran to rein in the Houthi attacks on shipping lanes. To go back to the Middle East Eye article that we showed you earlier, this one, Trump doesn't want Netanyahu to spoil his Gulf visit and is causing tension. We're going to read another extract there for you. Riyadh has effectively pre-negotiated Trump's visit to block talk of normalization without a ceasefire in Gaza or movement towards a Palestinian state, Arab officials told the Middle East Eye. Remember, this is Middle East Eye reporting 9th of May, that effectively Saudi Arabia has said that no deals in this current visit to Saudi Arabia by President Trump will be struck for normalization without agreement to a Palestinian state. We're going to read that again for you. Riyadh has effectively pre-negotiated Trump's visit to block talk of normalization without a ceasefire in Gaza or movement towards a Palestinian state, Arab officials told the Middle East Eye. But Trump doesn't appear to want to wait for Netanyahu. Very key point there. Trump does not want to wait for Netanyahu, the Middle East Eye reports. To continue there, his energy secretary, Chris Wright, said last month that the US had made progress with Saudi Arabia toward an agreement on helping Riyadh develop a commercial nuclear power industry. Meanwhile, Trump's National Security Council spread the word with business figures ahead of his visit that the administration was not tied to linking a nuclear energy deal worth billions of dollars to normalization with Israel, a former US official told the Middle East Eye. That represents a pivotal change that removes one of the three key pillars that the Biden administration was using to entice Riyadh into signing a normalization deal with Israel. Just the possibility that Trump could sell Saudi Arabia nuclear technology without normalization with Israel alarmed Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who was helping the Biden administration negotiate a normalization deal. Lindsey Graham, the tried and tested war hawk, is also opposing Trump's peace deals for a grand regional settlement in the Middle East for peace. Surprise, surprise, Lindsey Graham, the war hawk, sides with Netanyahu in opposing these Trump initiatives and is backed by the sacked former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and is backed by none other, surprisingly or not, than Tulsi Gabbard, and who is Director of National Intelligence, and Sebastian Gorka, a counter-terrorism so-called expert in the US administration. The chips are aligning. You are beginning by their deeds to recognize them, not by their rhetoric, not by their words, but by their positions and where they stand and whether or not they actively work for peace or actively oppose it. Of course, Senator Lindsey Graham has for a long time been a war hawk in the US administration. To read towards the end of that Middle East Eye report there at the bottom of the page. So it alarmed Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who was helping the Biden administration negotiate a normalization deal. Lindsey Graham said, quote, "I would like to make it crystal clear that I will never support a defense agreement with Saudi Arabia or other elements of a proposed deal that does not include normalizing the relationship with Israel as part of the package," Graham wrote on X on Thursday. So, from Yemen to nuclear energy, Trump is telling Netanyahu he won't let him spoil his second Arabian Gulf debut. That's the Middle East Eye's concluding line there. From Yemen to nuclear energy, Trump is telling Netanyahu he won't let him spoil his second Arabian Gulf debut. Trump is making the dividing line between him and Netanyahu very clear there for you all to see, as is reported in that Middle East Eye article that we just read from. Now, of course, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with normalization with Israel. The problem is normalization with Netanyahu, the war hawk, who does not want normalization with the region. Normalization with Israel will come in return for recognition of a Palestinian state, which Netanyahu has objected to. Therein lies the problem. Get rid of Hamas, get rid of Netanyahu, and you can have recognition for a Palestinian state and normalization with Israel. That, of course, as we've said, will be the last stage of this grand regional settlement for peace. Remember, we said it began with Afghanistan, it will end with Israel. In the middle, you'll see peace with Ukraine, peace with Syria, the regional wars, peace with Yemen, peace with Iran. All of those wars will settle down, and then they will save Israel to last. The Spectator Index reports from Reuters. Just in, Reuters reports that the US is, quote, no longer demanding Saudi Arabia normalize ties with Israel as a condition for progress on civil nuclear cooperation talks. That commercial use nuclear talks with Saudi Arabia, that's very important because, of course, the peace deal that Trump's negotiating with Iran is so that Iran can have commercial use of nuclear technology, but in return agrees not to weaponize their nuclear technology. And so, of course, if the peace, the direct peace that has been struck between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who were two countries locked in a proxy regional war, involves that they can both develop commercial nuclear technology, but in return, they abandon the arms race and the proxy regional war. So that's the framework that they're working to. And as the Spectator Index reports from Reuters, that Trump is no longer demanding the normalization with Israel as a condition for progress in those talks. So it's all looking very clear. Remember, this is backed, of course, by the recent drama involving Mike Waltz. As the Washington Post reports, Waltz ouster before Signalgate talks with Israel angered Trump. Subheading: the fired national security advisor engaged in intense coordination with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about military options against Iran ahead of an Oval Office meeting between the Israeli leader and Trump, two people said. That's dated the 3rd of May. So intent is Trump on going ahead with his grand regional settlement for peace in the Middle East that he's beginning to fire national security appointments who back channel with Netanyahu in order to obstruct that peace that Trump is seeking and block or even withhold information from President Trump as to how to achieve that peace. The Washington Post explains in that article itself, you see the highlighted part in blue, but Waltz also upset Trump after an Oval Office visit in early February by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, when the National Security Advisor appeared to share the Israeli leader's conviction that the time was ripe to strike Iran, two people said. Of course, Trump, instead of striking Iran, began peace talks with Iran, confirming what we've been forecasting here in Radical Media from prior to Trump coming to office, that he will negotiate a grand regional settlement for peace. And that's exactly what's transpired, folks. To continue reading from the Washington Post, the view by some in the administration was that Waltz was trying to tip the scales in favor of military action and was operating hand in glove with the Israelis. So what did Trump do? Well, it's here for you. If Jim Baker was doing a side deal with the Saudis to subvert George H.W. Bush, you'd be fired, a Trump advisor said, referring to Bush's Secretary of State. You can't do that. You work for the president of your country, not a president of another country. So Mike Waltz was duly fired for attempting to scupper President Trump's efforts to bring a grand regional settlement for peace in the Middle East that began with Afghanistan. It will end with Israel, and in the middle involves peace with Ukraine, peace with Syria, peace with Iran, and peace in Yemen, and peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And if Netanyahu wants a piece of that pie, he will need to agree to the last piece of that jigsaw, and that is a Palestinian state in return for normalization with Israel. That entire framework that we've just spelled out for you will be known as the Abraham Accords 2.0, or a revival of the Abraham Accords for a grand regional settlement for peace. And Tulsi Gabbard, Sebastian Gorka, the so-called counterterrorism expert, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director for National Intelligence, Lindsey Graham, the war hawk senator, and others opposing Trump in this endeavor, such as social media user Laura Loomer, should take note as to exactly what happened to Mike Waltz when he was kicked out of office for attempting to interfere with Trump's plans for peace. AF Post reports former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was caught using Signal, an Israeli modified version of Signal, or TM Signal, an Israeli modified version of Signal, with archiving features to receive and relay potentially classified information. As a result, he was kicked out. Al Jazeera has picked up on this analysis and framework that Radical Media has been forecasting for you since before Trump came to office. All the receipts are there for you on the Radical Media website, majidnawaz.substack.com. But Al Jazeera has finally picked up on this, and you can see them reporting here. Donald Trump pushed out U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz because he was reportedly talking to Israeli PM Netanyahu about bombing Iran. So, is Trump serious about a diplomatic reconciliation with Iran? Al Jazeera's Soraya Lenny explains. We're going to show you that clip. Bear with us. The video won't quite line up with your screens, but you'll be able to hear the audio at least, and we'll publish all of this for you properly tomorrow in the Radical Dispatch, which will be free for all subscribers. And of course, this Warrior Creed live stream will be available for our premium subscribers. All of that can be found at majidnawaz.substack.com. But here is Al Jazeera confirming the forecast Radical Media has been explaining to you from prior to Trump coming into his second term in office.
Heard of Signalgate, when a journalist was added to a chat group for senior US officials to plan how to best bomb Yemen.
Nobody was texting war plans.
Trump's eventual answer to the guy responsible, "You're fired." And so Mike Waltz was pushed out as National Security Advisor and nominated for the less sensitive position of US Ambassador to the UN. But it turns out that national security breach wasn't the only reason Trump got rid of him. It's reported that Waltz had been talking with Israel's Prime Minister on military options to attack Iran, all without the president's approval. Hawks all over Washington may seem to want the same thing. But Trump, despite his harsh rhetoric, seems more interested in making a deal, not war.
The Iran situation's coming out very well. Much rather have a deal than the other alternative.
Surprised? Well, yeah, because of the history between the two. And for that, we're gonna need a montage. Undeclared wars, proxy wars, economic wars, assassinations, cyber attacks, rallies, flag burnings, and name-calling.
Axis of evil.
Even though Trump, in his first term, pulled out of the existing Iran nuclear deal and was reportedly just millimeters away from bombing Iran, could he now completely turn relations around? Well, this is where we are now.
The first meeting was positive, constructive, compelling.
We could have a very, very good decision.
Iran and the US have moved very quickly through 3 rounds of nuclear talks where both sides have shown compromise. Iran's team is led by veteran diplomat and now foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, while Trump has Steve Witkoff, a straight-talking billionaire businessman who cuts through the niceties and gets things done, like the Gaza ceasefire. But now, let's get back to Benjamin Netanyahu. He's what diplomats would call a spoiler.
Brought a diagram for you.
He launched an unprecedented scare campaign to try to sink the first nuclear deal, which the Obama administration spearheaded. He successfully lobbied Trump to pull out in 2018, and now he's back in action, and not just planning bombing raids with Waltz. Analysts say as soon as it was clear Trump was serious about diplomacy, Bibi headed to Washington. Remember that quick trip, his second in 2 months? With these new revelations about why Waltz was moved on, analysts believe Netanyahu was there to pressure Trump to return to his hawkish stance on Iran. And Trump isn't exactly a dove. He's been bombing Iran's allies in Yemen for months, although he's just agreed to pause that for now, while Israel carries on. But still, Witkoff says US-Iran talks are moving ahead. And Trump says he's open to meet Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, while Iran talks up US economic opportunities in Tehran.
This is the single most important period in the history of Iran, which is a long history. And we want it to be a great country. Let it be a tremendously successful, rich country.
Whatever happens, analysts agree that Trump has done more to reset Iran ties in 4 months than his predecessor, Joe Biden, did in 4 years.
That's Al Jazeera, Arab-based news channel, preferring Trump over Joe Biden. You just heard it there for yourselves. Veteran left-wing journalist Glenn Greenwald has also finally come on board with this understanding that radical media has been pushing out since they forced Trump out of office in the interfered with 2020 elections, that both radical media and, of course, following President Trump's lead, President Trump had refused to recognize due to the interference against a sitting president in the White House. Glenn Greenwald has said, Trump advisors accuse Mike Waltz of not working for the president of your country, but instead working for the president of another country. You'll never guess which one. Of course, it's Israel. Waltz angered Trump by plotting with Netanyahu to attack Iran and then kept pushing Trump to do it. We're going to play you again a video of Glenn Greenwald saying that. But again, don't worry too much if this isn't aligned with your screens and the video is not formatted. We'll be publishing all these receipts for you tomorrow in the Radical Dispatch.
On Iran to get that solved without having to get into any bombing. I don't want to do that. I want them to work a deal. I want them to be very successful.
You can't get a deal that's identical to what Obama got, or people say, well, why did you withdraw in the first place? I believe that Trump does want to get an agreement. I don't think he wants a new Mideast war, but there's a lot of powerful people in Washington want that war, including the people in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, their network of funders and influencers and activists, not just Jewish ones, but evangelical ones, neocon ones, that consider this relationship with Israel to be of the highest priority. And for Trump to simply defy that in the way that's being suggested, Israel's largest newspaper reported today, Trump sidelines Netanyahu in Middle East policy as relations deteriorate. Quote, earlier this week, we reported that Netanyahu was frustrated with Trump Now it appears the American president has also lost patience with his Israeli counterpart. Two senior figures in Trump's circles stated in recent closed-door conversations, whose content reached Israel Hayom, that Trump has decided to stop waiting for Israel and instead wants to move forward with Middle East initiatives without Netanyahu. The sources explain that the president wishes to make decisions he believes will advance American interests, particularly regarding Saudi Arabia and Gulf states. Israel was supposed to participate in some of those steps, referring primarily to normalization with Saudi Arabia. That has been the kind of golden goose that Israel has been chasing, because then they would feel like they had a union against Iran. Part of Hamas's intent in attacking on October 7th to reprioritize, to put on the front burner the issue of the Palestinians, to make it impossible for those other countries to normalize relations with Israel. Israeli paper goes on, quote, however, according to Trump's perspective, Netanyahu is delaying making the necessary decisions. Given the situation, the president refuses to wait until Israel takes its expected actions and is proceeding without Israeli participation. Furthermore, Trump is furious about what he views as an attempt by Netanyahu and his team to pressure National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who has since been dismissed from his position, toward military action in Iran. Netanyahu claimed in response to the publication of this matter in the Washington Post that he spoke with Waltz only once. However, Trump remained unconvinced. So defended Mike Waltz even after Signalgate, which of course should have resulted in his firing. But what really infuriated Trump was, and there were lots of reports about this, was that Mike Waltz, knowing that Trump wanted to avoid war in Iran, knowing that Trump was trying hard to get an agreement with Iran so that he doesn't have to go to war with Iran, was plotting with Netanyahu behind Trump's back on basically how to proceed with this Israeli attack, which would force the United States to be involved. And I absolutely believe that Trump was enraged when he learned of that, and not just at Mike Waltz.
So this is confirming our framework and analysis, our long-standing framework here at Radical Media, that Trump is an anti-war president that is seeking a grand regional peace settlement for peace in the Middle East, despite and in spite of Netanyahu and those allied with Netanyahu who are opposing the peace. And public opinion is rapidly turning against Israel in this regard. And look at this. This is from the New York Times, opinion by Tom Friedman, May the 9th, 2025. This Israeli government is not our ally. And opinion is rapidly turning against Israel. We reported that in last week's Radical Dispatch, that the Internal Security Agency of Israel, Shin Bet, its head, Ronan Bar, has quit in disgust at Netanyahu and his warmongering in Gaza. And of course, Netanyahu is increasingly becoming isolated. All the parts are coming together for a grand regional settlement for peace, as Radical Media has reported for a long time. You can see that on your screens. Trump kickstarts Iran-US talks, grand regional settlement for peace is coming. And we're going to end by playing you a clip from our interview with Neil Oliver on GB News a couple of months ago, saying exactly what we've just discussed today would transpire. Have a look at this. Yes, and Trump's obviously very bellicose and has a slogan, peace through strength, which is factually actually the best way to make peace is when you're in a position of strength. But let's keep in mind the direction of travel. There are already signs, the writing is already on the wall, that we are moving towards a grand regional settlement for peace, which I write about a lot in my Radical Dispatch via my Substack. And that is that if we look at what's happened prior to this, you can see the direction of travel is headed towards the de-escalation of World War III. And we were at the precipice. It's not just the negotiations between Trump and Putin over Ukraine, which are part of that de-escalation but haven't happened yet. But the ones that have happened, we can already point to. We mentioned Afghanistan. The withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan was negotiated under Trump in his first term. The chaotic way in which it was done, if you remember, happened in the first few months of the Biden administration. And Biden is responsible for making sure that those last-minute preparations didn't end up as terribly as we obviously saw on our cameras, people falling from aeroplanes. But the actual hard graft of the negotiations were done under Trump's first term. So there's an example where Trump's direction of travel has been anti-war and withdrawing troops. And to achieve that, they facilitated dialogue directly with the Taliban in Qatar. But that's not just happened in Afghanistan. We saw that was reciprocated by Russia in Syria. Again, direction of travel being to de-escalate World War III. The Russians were backing Assad and they are backing Iran. The Russian Navy withdrew from Syria prior to Jolani, now the Prime Minister Ahmad al-Shara, prior to him marching into Damascus. The Russians had already withdrawn their army without a fight. Upon seeing that, the Iranians took the signal and withdrew support from Assad as well. And that's all documented. It's not in dispute. The Russians pulling their army back is a matter of fact. So you can see there a reciprocation for what the Americans did in Afghanistan. Keep in mind, the Russians were in Afghanistan before the Americans were in the 1980s. So that's next door to key strategic Russian interests in Central Asia, former USSR states, now the Commonwealth of Independent States. So you've got a quid pro quo where I think you can see both sides removing their forces and de-escalating conflict, now talking directly with each other over Ukraine. And it's for that reason that I think that these talks with the bilateral talks with the US and Iran are also going to end in that in a similar pattern. The Russians will not back Iran for a broader World War III style conflict. If there was a war with Iran, of course, it would embroil China and Russia. We'd be back to the precipice of World War III because it's as Syria was for Putin, Iran even more so is a red line for the Russians and the Chinese. They will not allow the physical military occupation of Iran. We saw that they drew that line already in Syria. It happened with Iraq. They drew the line in Syria. That's why we know already, Iran being a much more powerful nation than Syria, they won't allow it to happen to Iran. And that's why for them, it will be a matter of all-out conflict. We know Trump doesn't want that. And that's why there is, as I always say to you, Neil, a lot of cause for optimism here, despite what Netanyahu. Well, you can see it's all transpired and played out exactly as we said it would. That was us on GB News with Neil Oliver a couple of months ago. And as you can see, that's precisely what this week's live stream reveals has indeed transpired. Trump has decided to freeze out Netanyahu to continue pursuing his grand regional settlement for peace. And the shadow knows. That's all we got time for this week's Warrior Creed live stream. You've been listening to the Radical Majid Nawaz. All of the receipts for everything we've discussed today will be published in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, found via majidnawaz.substack.com. It will be freely available to all our subscribers, except this Warrior Creed live stream, which will be a premium product for our premium subscribers, in addition to all the other behind the paywall information that our premium subscribers gain. We thank you very much for your support. Some more radical interviews, long form podcasts will also soon be available for our premium subscribers. We encourage all the free subscribers to join. Until next week, thank you very much for joining us. You've been listening to the Radical Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
This service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.